guys, what's up? I was recently interviewed by Nakita Reed. Her podcast, Tangible Remnants. It's a podcast talks about architecture, sustainability, preservation, race, gender, color. You can get it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Nakita and I go back 2012, 2013. I did a series of women in architecture events, and she showed up to one. And it was her, and I met April too that year. It was like, how do I not know these two Black women? And they were like, how do we not know about you? I am rebroadcasting the interview between us. If you want to hear her intro and then the same interview, check her out. And also, you should check her out in general. She has this one episode called Education, Connections, and the Color of Law. She read the Color of Law book and she gives her take on it. And she had me laughing because it's so her personality shined in that conversation. When you're networking, back in the day when we used to go to functions, especially in architecture, whether it be a seminar or happy hour or, some vendor has some type of showcase showing their products or whatever, you're usually the only one in the room. You're usually the only Black woman in the room. And so when you see another Black woman, you're like, hey, and you definitely haven't met them. You're like, hey, who are you? Let's share some stories. It's probably more difficult now. Well, no, because there's 10,000 webinars, right? So you show up to a webinar and what do? How do you network in a webinar? How does that work? You can go into rooms and you can put yourself in a smaller group. So instead of having 25 people or 50 people, there's an opportunity for you to meet 5 people. How are we going to connect? And I feel like I am connecting more and more with people, more international people for sure because of this pandemic, but it's missing the local. It's missing the randomness of meeting people. How do we solve this problem? Because that's how I met Nakita. That's how I met April. It was through an event. The NOMA conference was this weekend, or this weekend. And I'm curious, how did you guys network? I know they had some, a Jeopardy. Was it Jeopardy? And I wasn't, just to let you guys know, even though I did 2 workshops, I was unable to attend the entire conference. I was there for the Black Women Architecture Brunch, which celebrated the 500 licensed Black African American female architect. Huge celebration that took place during that call. And so, needless to say, I was hoping to network somehow, even through the breakout session, but unfortunately, it wasn't really an opportunity to connect with strangers or to hear other women's stories. And maybe we should just get back to that some way, somehow. Even with the panel, the Vortex, the way it was set up, we couldn't really interact with the audience the way that we would normally interact doing it face to face. And that's the challenge with virtual webinars. Besides the networking, it's the connection. I don't know how we can get out of this. It's kind of weird, right? It's that parallel of how I am meeting strangers through Twitter, through Instagram, but the sole purpose of attending virtual conferences is to meet strangers. So it's interesting. It's interesting. And I still haven't really figured out, or maybe anybody else haven't figured out. Oh, if you have figured out, please DM me and let me know. How are you meeting people? So yeah, but again, this is a rebroadcast. I did not mean to rebroadcast this, but this past week has been really hectic, and the episode that I was supposed to edit, I never got a chance to edit. So you get this. So I hope you enjoy.
So I wanted to get you on the podcast, one, because what you're doing with Arches Poly, your podcast, inspired me to not be afraid to use my voice, particularly as a Black person in the design profession. So thank you for that. And so I wanted to chat with you a little bit about what got you going on Arches Poly and what are some of the reasons that got you started in that one.
Well, it kind of happened haphazardly. It all started with a group of us, actually. One thing I loved about our group is that we were honest and we're all diverse, and our conversations were always political. In the office, outside the office, we had difference of opinions and we respect one another. And so I had this idea that, hey, you know what, we should record and post our conversations, because we really got deep into a lot of topics, both related to politics, because, we are in Washington, D.C., and in architecture as well. So I bought the domain name and the website, and we made one podcast post. And then we all left the firm, went our separate ways, moved to different areas. And it was very difficult for us to come together again. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of sat with all this resource, basically, just sitting there. And I was like, I already paid for it. I might as well. And as far as the topic, and it changed, or I changed it, I was having difficulty in taking my exams, my architectural exams. And I, even went to a therapist and everything. And I had to sit back and analyze, why did I get in architecture in the first place? And so I looked back into my past and how I grew up. And that was the spark. That was like, hey, I'm going to study architecture. And I figured that maybe I should research and figure out where I live, and like investigating where I live. And so that became my podcast. And, I am blessed to grow up in Chocolate City and to have the resources of all these Black architects. So growing up, or I'm going to say growing up, in high school, I interned in a Black firm, and that was my basis. I learned so much from them. Even to this day, the stuff that I always go back to and it pops up, I was like, oh, that's what they're talking about. Oh, that's what they meant. So that also became part of it. It's interviewing my friends and seeking out people of color.
Right.
Or people who believe in the community, because it's not just people of color, obviously, but, white folks as well.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I, to some extent, took for granted a little bit once I moved back to the DC area, was the fact that there are so many Black architects and Black professionals of color that are doing really interesting and great things in the city and the area. Coming from Roanoke, where it was not very diverse, and even living in Blacksburg, which is a total misnomer. There's not many Black people in Blacksburg, but being able to then come to DC and have the option to talk to so many different Black architects, knowing that our numbers are low. We only make up like 2% of the profession in terms of licensure, but just knowing how much architecture touches the built environment and everything that we do and the lasting impacts that it has. So I know on your podcast, you were talking about the urban renewal and the housing project that you grew up in and the impacts that had on you. So then what are you finding as you're doing more research on the different housing projects in the area?
One of the shocking things that I came across was that everything is planned. Mm-hmm. When I was talking to Sarah Schofield, I didn't know that covenants had these disclaimers of do not sell to Black people. Like I didn't know that.
And that's interesting to me as well, because I didn't know that either until I started reading The Color of Law this year. I'm like, how did we both go through architecture school and like racial covenants weren't really a thing that was covered? Blew my mind. Sorry, back to it.
And then how divided or separated the city really is. Like, even though it's predominantly Black, and now it's like half and half, and how the goal is to eradicate, the goal is to eliminate Black people from DC. That's the goal. Like, that's the goal. And it's always been the goal from the get-go. Even when Marion Barry was around, he recognized that and how he employed Black architects and
Mm-hmm.
Black construction firms and Black engineers to build the city. And now all that is being erased.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing from the covenant piece and kind of getting back to the idea of eradication, it's kind of the desire to not have Black people be at an equal level, because but even within the covenants, there was always a clause, well, can't rent or lease or sell to a Black person, and basically a Black person can only occupy this space if they're in a subservient role. But so it was like, it wasn't like there was we've never seen a Black person, we don't want a Black person in this space. It's more of we don't want a Black person who thinks that they're at our level in this space. If they want to clean the house, sure, fine. Cut the grass, walk the kids, yeah, but not actually live here and be equal.
And going back to urban renewal, another thing that I learned was that it was a two-parter. So you had Southwest One and you had Northwest One, and how they treated the eradications differently. So Southwest One was the first, and they just took people's land and just, basically what they do to this day. They come up and say, hey, we have this plan and we're going to take your home, or we're going to offer you some money for your home, and then you can come back. But, later on, there may be some stipulations as for you to come back, or you can come back into this section and you have to meet these requirements. And, it's just rules. And so I was like, I was fine just the way I was. Why are you coming up messing all this stuff up?
Right.
And so with Northwest one fascinating thing, and that was different, was you had all these churches that was involved. So like with Tyler House, you had Mount Airy Baptist Church. And with Sibley, which is across the street, Sibley Plaza, which is across the street from Tyler House, that was supposed to be a hospital, but then they converted into housing. And then behind that was Simpson Quarter. And what I learned about Simpson Quarter was it was this guy from Georgetown. And I think he was in law, I believe, and he became the developer. And then there was also Temple Court, and there was one more that I'm forgetting. But you had all these like individuals, all these organizations, and to be involved in it. And I didn't see anything with Southwest One in terms of the organization of different folks coming together. I didn't see that. I know that with Clofield Witter Smith, she got together with Daniel Kirby. Is that his name? The landscape guy? Oh my gosh, I can't remember the guy's name. He's this famous landscape guy. There's more documentation about Southwest One because of her and her work. And I didn't really want to go in too deep. Like, I'm not an expert in that area, only because I didn't grow up there. But yeah, so the fascinating part was you had all these churches involved, and I was shocked about the university part. And it kind of makes sense too, because I remember growing up, there was always some tutoring program going on. So I remember when I was like 8 or 9, or maybe 13, 14. I don't know. I remember I had math was always my struggle. And it was like algebra. And I just could not get it. I remember it was like a tutor, and he went to Gonzaga College. And it's like a preparatory school. And now as an adult, I was always like wondering, like, why did they pick Tyler House? Or like, what? Maybe it was the proximity, because they're you can walk from where Tyler House is to where Gonzaga, that private school is. And in talking to some other individuals, they were like, yeah, school, the institution also contribute to the area. So it's this community, but it was kind of the culture was so different. And I think the mindset was different. It was kind of like, we are helping all these poor Black people. Let's come in and say your thing. We're going to come in and teach you and tutor you and, maybe find God or something. And you just trying to survive. The disconnect, I guess, is it wasn't that way in the beginning. Tyler House was meant to be low to moderate income. And that's if you rent was $35 a month or something at that time in the 60s, 70s. You should be able to afford it and you're your family. And it's not so much we're poor Black people. It was just, you're just working class people. And I think that's the disconnect. And that's the disconnect today, is that it's not so much a handout as much as we just give us a job and affordability to live and to eat, and then we will thrive.
Right. So then have you found anything that made it clear when it flipped from just low to moderate income to subsidized housing, I guess?
It was subsidized housing, pretty much. Because even to this day, like when my family left and they renovated Tyler House, they attempted to do a mixed use because of the location and everything. And what happened was you got white flight. And so I'm thinking that what happened back then too is that, yeah, middle income is welcome, but then you have one or two bad apples and then people just leave. And so to keep rent, you become fully subsidized.
Right. And then, and with the white flight, then it's Black people in Tower House probably didn't have the options to leave because of the racial covenants and restrictions that are on there, whereas white residents likely had more housing options to go to.
I was surprised because Sarah had mentioned that the area next to it had those covenants in it. And growing up, I never saw white people in any of those areas.
I mean, the fact that even now, like I'm driving down New York Avenue, when I see a white person on New York Avenue, that surprises me because for decades, you're right, there just wasn't white people in that area.
I mean, I remember it was crazy. So I really wanted to take photographs of Tyler House, walking around there. And I did a slow drive-by. But it was crazy because it was like you had these guys and they were playing craps, shooting dice and making money. And then a couple of feet away, you have this white couple with a stroller walking down the street. You kind of want to see how this interaction was going to go. Right. And then across from them were like DCPD. So you kind of like just want to look and see how all of this will play out. But it was just weird. And maybe it shouldn't be weird.
I mean, maybe it's making space for multiple socioeconomic levels and multiple demographics and the idea of space for all. But it is still like, particularly in DC, when you see a white woman jogging with her headphones in an area that used to be predominantly Black, that's when you're like, okay, well, this area is gentrifying.
Yeah. Which means everything costs a lot. And I mean, I always go back and ask myself, is this really weird? Is this okay? Right. Because I'm still finding my own stereotypes amongst Black people, right? Like the guys who are shooting craps right in broad daylight, throwing money down, rolling the dice, they're all gathered there. Like you're on heightened alert because you don't know if anything's going to pop off or not.
Right.
And
exactly.
And is that reality? Is that okay? Is that like what? How should I react? Should you call the police when you see that? And then at what point does it become dangerous? Should you wait till danger happens? Right. Or should you just mind your own business and keep on going? What do you do in this situation? As a Black woman, like as a woman, right? In general, you see a bunch of guys, you end up playing this game with yourself.
Yeah.
And I try to catch myself, and I probably said something that's inappropriate, and I try to catch myself. I try to check myself because I don't want to feed into that notion,
Right. And it's like, it's that subtle, the game of, okay, let me check myself, make sure I'm not playing into that emotion, but then also let me not ignore red flags or my intuition if I really do feel unsafe. Because I totally get that in terms of just seeing any group of men. I mean, if I see frat boys coming towards me, I'm equally petrified as if it's, a group of Black males, just because it's you don't know, and groupthink takes over, and we are women and we're taught and trained to protect ourselves and all that.
I mean, even like, because I went to Falling Water recently, and driving there, all you see is Confederate flags and Trump Pence flags. And so it's like, I'm also at heightened alert because I don't want any trouble either, you know?
Yeah.
So it works both ways, you know? Like,
Yeah. And let's get into that a little bit, because I think that's a really good distinction in terms of what we're seeing in the built environment that's triggering us as Black women, even operating in different spaces. So like seeing the Confederate flags, the Trump signs, the being on country roads, knowing that if your car breaks down, you're likely not going to find a Black person in that local area to help. So what were some of the other feelings you were having or other fears as you were going to Falling Water?
oh my gosh. Well, I drive an '05 Corolla.
Okay.
And it did not like driving up those mountains at all. Like, it was struggling. So if you're familiar with traveling to Falling Water, we hopped on 70, and then from 70 we went on 68. So 70 and I think 68 too, it's like 70 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
My car was going 65. If I was trying to do 70, it was like, wait a minute. So right next to the speedometer to the left is that other thing. I don't know what you call odometer. I don't know what you call it.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes from 1 all the way up to like, I think 7 or 8 or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And usually it hovers around 1 or 2, maybe 3. When I tried to floor it, it was like, like it was just. So, and then when exactly. And then my brakes started like making noise. So I was petrified. If I was to break down,
mm-hmm.
what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?
Right.
I'm hours away from home. Like, what am I gonna do?
Right.
So that's one thing. And then it's interesting though, because when we finally got to the site and you walk up and stuff, and everybody knows of Falling Water. I knew about it, but I didn't like read about it. Like I got the gist, you know, he did some in the 40s, like 1939, whatever. And he did this cantilever over the water, and it was, you know,
right.
That's what you learned. But I didn't know it had like a servant's quarters up top.
Mm-hmm.
And so traveling up, and you go see the servant quarters, and then you see like a little path for them to enter the house to do their thing. Mm-hmm. Their separate entrance. I started thinking about who were these people that were serving the homeowners. Mm-hmm. So when you go there, you enter this little town, and because it was Labor Day weekend, everybody was out, and you did whitewater rafting, and it was crowded. Like, people were just everywhere. Mm. And I saw these Black kids on their bikes. I wondered, where do they live? Mm-hmm. And I started thinking back then and how everything was segregated, especially up there. You know, you had the whites only and you had coloreds. Mm-hmm. So I'm like imagining that they were not allowed to be in this town and, you know, enjoy the water. They probably had a separate area that they had to go to. As architects, we don't talk about that. Who were the servants? I'm pretty sure it's like online somewhere. I just have to do my research. And who were the laborers? Who were at the quarry to bring down the stone? Like, who were these people?
Right. I mean,
who built these homes? Yeah,
exactly. And like, and even today, I don't know that we do a great job as architects to really make sure that we're giving credit to the different subs and GCs that are actually building the buildings that we're designing. It's like, yeah, okay, this contractor, this construction company is building it, but we don't know the actual people who are doing it. So I think that's a good point, that we're still not good at giving credit to the people who are actually building these buildings, knowing that most of them are people of color. Mm-hmm. So why don't we pivot a little bit? Let's talk a little bit about some of the influences on your career early on. In particular, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about Barbara Laurie and the impact she had on your career so far, just because I never got a chance to meet her, but I've heard so many things about her legacy, and I'd love to have it continue being talked about a little bit on this podcast.
Oh my gosh, like, she was great. Like, she wasn't a mother, definitely not. She wasn't a sister. She was like my best friend, except I only talk to her every so often. Okay. I grew up with her. Again, I did my internship at Devereux Pannell, and this was like earlier on. And after school, I would just pop up there. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just Barbara. It was, you know, Danny and Anthony. And, you know, I rarely saw Marshall. But, you know, Marshall knew me and Paul knew me. And so and, you know, they would have NOMA events there, and it was a family. It was truly a family. And I thought this was the norm. Like I didn't know anything else. Their office was 717 D Street Northwest. And I went to school without walls. So I would walk from walls to there.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I go up to the top floor, and they had like a 2-story floor, but the second story was open space. And so Barbara had the corner on the second floor, and she would be on the phone, or she'd be working or whatever. And I usually go there, graduated high school, of course, in college years. I would visit them, and we would do lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit there late. You know, I didn't care. It was like, whatever. And I would go through her magazines. I would steal her magazines. And, you know, we would go out to dinner, and it would be somewhere around Gallery Place or whatever. And we would just talk. We would talk about life. We would talk about me, what's going on in my struggles with school or work or whatever. She would talk about her and her personal life, and I would talk about my personal life. And it was, whenever I had a career challenge, wherever I felt like I can't do architecture anymore,
mm-hmm.
she would be there. And I miss that so much. She would just, because she knew me,
mm-hmm.
and she knew where I came from. So it was, and, you know, I knew her ambitions and I remember when she was doing the 200, and she was having her students do all the research and stuff. I remember we was talking about her getting like fellowship, and she kept procrastinating. And I was like, what are you doing? Why are you procrastinating? She's like, it's not enough time. And then when I remember that year when she became the first Black female AIADC president. And that was the year, because it was her, and then Marshall became the first Black AIA president, and then
mm-hmm.
I won an award from AIADC. And so it was like this huge celebration.
Yeah.
And we went, there was this like Indian restaurant that we went to, and to celebrate and stuff. And I loved this Indian restaurant. It was so good. It was expensive as hell. And I was like, we got to go there, but you're paying. It was just like, she was beyond a mentor. Like, she was way beyond a mentor. To know her from, I was like 15 till she passed away. And that's a long time to know somebody.
Yeah.
And so when everything went down, it was like devastating. I remember I was at work, and I was perusing Facebook, and everybody was like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Like, I can't believe she's gone. And I was like,
mm-hmm.
wait a minute, what's going on? And so I called her. The first thing I did was call her.
Yep.
And I was like, there's this horrible prank saying that you're dead. So come on, like, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, this, and then I saw Kathy Dixon post something. I was like, oh, fuck, like, she's dead.
Right.
I left work. I immediately left work, and I ran down to their office. And at that time, they moved right next to the convention center, and it was closed. And then I ran over to her house, because she lived on U Street. And that's when I randomly ran into Kathy Prigmore. And we eventually went into a restaurant, but we just sat somewhere on U Street, and we was just in shock. And we consoled each other. And it was the way that she passed. It was like, you go over it over and over again. And you're like, how could I have prevented this? How could I have do something to stop this, or to maybe, what can you do? It was her time. And
right.
I went to the wake. I didn't go to the funeral. And I don't, to this day, I haven't visited her at all. And I think she's in New York. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. And I didn't even investigate where she was to this day. She was a huge, huge influence on me to this day. And no one can replace her.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Whenever I get the chance to honor someone's legacy like that, I wanted to acknowledge that and take the time, and knowing how much of an impact she had on your life, your career. I just wanted to make sure that we talked about it a little bit. So then,
I also want to mention real quick is that she had lupus, and it's a testament to her strength, because she was always in pain. And she suffered hair loss.
Mm-hmm.
So she always wore a wig, and it affected her skin also. And she was always tired,
Mm-hmm.
but she kept going. It's kind of like with Chadwick almost. It's kind of like with her, you physically saw certain things,
Mm-hmm.
but then you like, oh, well, you just brushed it off, or, you're like whatever. But it was like part of our friendship is that I knew what she was going through. And that was the amazing thing, that she kept going. That's the thing that I also carry, is that her strength.
Mm-hmm.
She was a teacher. She was part owner of a firm. Like, she was, 51% owner of the firm at the time. I mean, she was going after these huge projects that, like, she was president one year. She was going to be FAI. She was doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and all with physical pain. And I've yet to meet anyone else like her. I've come close, but no one that I know of
Right.
went through that.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I know that we have covered a lot of things. Any other things you want to cover before we wrap up?
No, that's about it. I'm still doing my research. Architecture is Political is my podcast. Nakia has also been mentioned, as well as on. You have influenced me greatly also. And even the people. Like, you are so connected. I grab all the people and I dump them on my podcast. And so it's just like, thank you for your network.
You're so welcome. Like, I love what you're doing, and I'm just so excited to be able to expose you to, and more people to you, because I'm like, oh yeah, you need to talk to her, because she's doing cool things. So I'm excited about it. But thank you. So then we'll put in the show notes, I'll put links to the podcast and other places people can find you online. Well, thank you for jumping on the podcast and exploring more of the tangible remnants of different things in your life and what's connected in your profession.
Thank you.
Hey, listeners. I have an exciting announcement. I decided to launch a membership program for the show, where you have a chance to support me and the show directly. I love creating the show, and it means the world to me that you all tune in to keep hearing me week after week. But it takes an immense amount of time and energy to produce. I want to keep the show going, and I want to invest in its growth. And I also want you to become a partner with me in this journey. That's why I'm excited to give you a chance to officially become a supporter of the show at glow.fm/archispolly, ARCHISPOLLY, or by clicking the link in the show notes. It's quick and easy. It takes less than 30 seconds and just takes clicking a link in the show notes and using Apple or Google Pay. You don't have to create any new logins, and you can contribute as much or as little as you like. If this show is part of your day or week and you like what I'm doing, then visit glow.fm/archispolly, all one word, and support me and the show in any way you can today.